Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right into the absolutely fascinating world of India's rivers. We're going to move way beyond simple rote memorization today, the kind you did in school. Instead, we're uncovering the real science, the ecology, and the history behind these massive bodies of water. We're looking at the why and the how, because let's be honest, a river isn't just some blue line on a map. It's a natural saw cutting through solid rock. It's an ancient trade route. And, well, sometimes it's a tragic victim of our own industrialization.
So today we're tracking these waters through 5 distinct phases. We've got the mountain saws, the restless destroyers, victims of progress, deadly trade routes, and finally, vanishing and urban rivers. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, let's kick off our first section with a bit of a geographic mystery. Think about the mighty Sutlej River. It originates all the way up near Mount Kailash and Rakshas Tal in Tibet, and then flows northwest right into Himachal Pradesh. Now, amazingly, the Sutlej cuts right through the massive Himalayan ranges to create these incredibly deep gorges. But wait a second. How can water cut through a gigantic solid mountain? Isn't a mountain, stronger than a river? Well, the answer is a total mind-bender. The river is actually older than the mountain.
Right, so the crucial concept here is something called an antecedent river. Millions of years ago, as the Eurasian and Indian tectonic plates slammed together, the Himalayas began to rise. We're talking millimeter by millimeter. But the thing is, the Sutlej River was already flowing there. So as the land slowly lifted, the Sutlej acted like a relentless natural saw. It just kept cutting down into the earth at the exact same rate the mountain was rising. This created a dramatic, deep gorge at Shipki La, without the river ever actually changing its path. The mountain was literally never allowed to block the water. Let's shift gears and look at a river with a completely different personality, the Kosi. It's famously, or maybe infamously, known as the Sorrow of Bihar. This river is born from 7 high-altitude streams up in the Nepal and Tibet region, with the Sun Kosi, Arun Kosi, and Tamar Kosi being the major ones. Now, this river travels 720 kilometers before finally meeting the Ganga at Kursela. But unlike the Sutlej, the Kosi behaves like a deeply restless highway driver who's constantly violently changing lanes, causing absolute havoc along the way.
And this brilliantly illustrates the phenomenon of meandering. The Kosi is just infamous for not sticking to one path. But to really grasp why it's so incredibly destructive, why it constantly shifts like that, we have to look past basic geography and dive into the sheer physics of its descent. Ultimately, it's all a matter of speed and gravity. You see, the Kosi's own water and silt become its worst enemies. As those 7 streams rush down the incredibly steep Himalayan gradients, they pick up immense speed, carrying massive boulders and tons of heavy silt. But the exact moment it leaves the mountains and hits the flat plains of Bihar, the gradient just vanishes. That sudden loss of speed forces the river to drop all that heavy silt right onto its own riverbed. So it literally builds a dam against itself, blocks its own path, and then violently spills sideways right into heavily populated areas. Moving away from the mountains, let's focus on the eastern plateaus, where we find a totally different kind of valley. Most mountain rivers, like the Sutlej or Kosi we just talked about, they carve their own V-shaped valleys over time. But the Damodar River, which originates from the Chota Nagpur Plateau, doesn't do that. It doesn't carve its own valley. Instead, it takes the easy route, flowing through a pre-existing tectonic rift valley. That's basically a natural trench that formed when the land between 2 parallel fault lines simply sank into the earth. Historically speaking, the Damodar was incredibly life-giving. It even fed the 1881 Eden Canal for agriculture. But today, if you look at the 300-kilometer stretch between Giridih and Durgapur, it's terrifyingly referred to as a biological desert. Now, when we hear the word desert, we usually picture dry sand, right? But here, we have a river that's full of flowing water. So how on earth can a river full of water be a desert? Well, the precise biological mechanism behind this is fascinating, but yeah, it's incredibly tragic. The Chota Nagpur and Durgapur areas are massive, massive coal and industrial hubs. And for decades, untreated toxic waste and coal ash were just dumped straight into the Damodar. This causes a massive spike in something called biological oxygen demand. Basically, bacteria rapidly multiply to decompose all this organic and chemical waste. And while doing that, they suck all the dissolved oxygen straight out of the water. With no oxygen left, absolutely zero, fish and aquatic plants simply suffocate. The water keeps flowing, sure, but it is entirely, literally, dead. Okay, let's leave that heavy reality behind for a moment and head way up north. Up here, the drainage web gets incredibly complex. The geographical origins are just fascinating. For instance, the Jhelum River is born at Varanag, flows right through Wooler Lake, and famously hosts the city of Srinagar. Then you've got the Chenab. Actually, fun fact, it's born from the union of two totally distinct rivers, the Chandra and the Bhaga, which meet at Tandi in Himachal Pradesh. And we absolutely can't forget the Son River. It's a fantastic example of a peninsular slope, defying expectations by flowing purely south to north from the Amarkantak Hills.
Now, right in the middle of this complex icy web is the Shiok River in the Karakoram region, and it bears a name that honestly sends chills down your spine: the River of Death. Back in ancient times, traders who were traveling from Yarkand in Central Asia all the way to Ladakh used this exact river route.
Now, you are probably wondering, why on earth would anyone risk their precious cargo, let alone their lives, in a place literally called the River of Death? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The surrounding Karakoram Mountains were absolutely impossible to cross. The terrain was just too harsh, way too steep. So that made these river-carved valleys the only natural engineering available to them. They didn't really have a choice. The river was the road.
And man, what a road it was. In the summer, melting glaciers caused horrific, unpredictable flash floods. Then in the winter, traders literally had to walk over the river's frozen ice sheets, never knowing when the ice beneath their feet might just snap. You see similar things nearby, too. The Zanskar River cuts these incredibly deep gorges through harsh rocks to meet the Indus. And the Spiti River navigates the Kunzum Range to join the Sutlej near Namjia village. Whether it was the treacherous frozen ice of the Shiok or the steep, dark gorges of Zanskar, these waters literally carved out the pathways of ancient human history and global trade.
Exiting those towering mountains, we hit western India, and we run into a really bizarre geographic anomaly with the Luni River. The Luni flows with considerable force for about 500 kilometers, but it never actually reaches the sea. It just vanishes into the Rann of Kutch. How does a massive, powerful river just disappear into thin air? Well, it doesn't vanish into thin air, it vanishes into the ground. This phenomenon is known as inland drainage. It basically makes the Luni resemble an exhausted marathon runner who just collapses into a swamp, literal inches before crossing the finish line at the ocean. It physically does not have the strength or the water volume to push through to the sea. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why it vanishes. We call it the sponge effect. The Luni flows through some extremely hot, arid regions of Rajasthan and Gujarat. That means intense evaporation is constantly stealing its water along the journey. By the time it finally reaches the Rann of Kutch, which is this massive, sandy salt pan, the highly porous ground acts like a giant, thirsty sponge. It literally just sucks whatever remaining trickle of water there is straight down into the earth. Before we wrap up today, I want to point out that the peninsular region offers its very own set of geographic rebels. Instead of following the standard flow, the terrain actually forces the Mahi River to take this sharp, sudden southwest turn right into the Gulf of Khambat. Then you have the Hagari, which is born from two sister streams, the Veda and Avathi, and the Kali River, which carves this distinct, beautifully sweeping arc straight into the Arabian Sea. Nature even uses these rivers as political blueprints. The Sankosh River actually acts as a literal, flowing, natural border between the states of Assam and West Bengal. For our final geographic anomaly in this explainer, we are going to contrast these ancient, wild mountain rivers with a completely different beast altogether, the modern urban river. When we think of a river's source, we almost always picture a pristine glacier or a bubbling little mountain spring. But urban geography, it plays by its own completely different set of rules. Just take Mumbai's Midi River, for example. It is not born from pristine glaciers. No, it literally originates from the monsoon overflow of Vihar Lake. Just 2 kilometers downstream from there, it catches the overflow from Powai Lake, and then it traverses 18 kilometers right through the absolute heart of a concrete jungle before finally emptying out into Mahim Bay. It just goes to prove that geography isn't only something that happens out in the wild, untouched wilderness. It's happening right here, right in the middle of our most crowded cities. So to sum up this explainer, my hope is that this leaves you looking at a map not just as a dry list of facts to memorize for an exam, but as a dynamic, ongoing story of nature's sheer power. From the Sutlej relentlessly sawing through rising mountains, to the Damodar suffocating from our own industrial greed, to the Luni completely vanishing into the hot desert sand, these aren't just bodies of water. They are the living, breathing engineers of our world. So the next time you cross a bridge or trace a line on an atlas, ask yourself, what exactly is the story this water is trying to tell us? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will absolutely see you in the next explainer.